What's up, you beautiful chuds? I'm back to do another review, this time of a movie that will be getting, hopefully, its cinema release in selected cinemas near you on March the 6th. This movie is Dolly. Dolly is a movie that is a sort of throwback to 70s sort of very dark, sinister grindhouse horror. If that's your thing, then Dolly might be up your street. But I'm going to give you my very, very honest review on it. As I said, it's not a movie that's out yet. I got the opportunity to see an early screener of the movie. So a big thank you to Strike Media Global and Vertigo Releasing for sending me the screener. It was a movie that I have seen a little bit about, and it's been around, and also it was a movie that, of course, with it being sort of an old school throwback slasher, of course it was one that I wanted to see because, you know, with these sort of movies, you want to see if they're going to do anything they can to interject sort of anything new into modern day horror that's trying to almost replicate or be something of the past, something from the history of horror. Is it trying to be something like that and take reference and taking inspiration from that? But does it do its sort of best to try and be its own thing? Well, that's what we're going to get into. As I always say on these reviews, I want to be as honest as I possibly can be. And to be as honest as I possibly can be, I need to talk about things that happen in the movie. So there are going to be probably spoilers. I never try and do it purposely, but it just happens. So maybe if it's a movie that you haven't seen, maybe don't watch the review yet. If it's a movie that you want to see, maybe don't watch the review because, as I said, it's not really out this movie yet. But if you sort of really want to know what the movie's like and how I feel about it before you actually see the movie, well, then keep watching. But this is my very honest review, and I do that by going through my pros, I go through my cons, and I go through my overall thoughts at the end. And as I said, I try and be as honest and constructive and as critical as I possibly can be, while being as fair as I possibly can be to the fact that these people made a bloody movie, which is incredible. So let's get into my pros. So one of the things that I really liked about Dolly is the fact that it is aesthetically very nice because it is all shot on 16mm film. So it really gives you that old school, very grainy, very almost sort of low quality-esque look that it always looks absolutely incredible because obviously, you know, from the past, we got so many iconic movies that were shot on these sort of cameras or with these sort of lenses that they would, you know, and they looked so dirty and grimy, and they, you know, obviously we had Grindhouse, we had the Video Nasties, you know, these movies that are made sort of now in that sort of style were trying to be sort of a form of replication for that. Now, I will go into what is a little bit of a negative, a bit of a con about the aesthetical side of it, but it's only very minor, so it really doesn't matter. It's just something that annoyed me a little bit, but you know, because sometimes does using this sort of style of filmmaking or look or aesthetic, sometimes does it be seen as a gimmick? I'll get into that. But for this movie, because it's trying to potentially, you know, be a modern day horror, but replicating, trying to have that aesthetic look of, as I said, like Video Nasties, Grindhouse movies, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, movies from the 70s, you know, and 80s sometimes of horror. I think it does a very good job. Also, as well, one big thing that really helps with that is lighting. And of course, you know, there's a lot of lighting in this movie in regards to a lot of, you know, the orange tinted lights that are around the rooms and stuff like that. You know, this movie looks very good. It does a lot of really cool wide shots as well, where they're making the use of showing the surroundings or showing what's happening in a lot of really cool wide shots, but still keeping that 16mm film grain and formula. And it looks very, very good. I would probably say there was a movie that in sort of recent memory, I think it was like 2022, I think it was Christmas, Bloody Christmas. That was another movie that sort of like went back to this old school style of filming, you know, film on 16mm and so on. And I would probably say that might have looked better. But I think there was probably a bit more creativity in the shots of sort of, with that movie. But I'm, you know, comparing it to that, I mean, I don't know why I'm even bothering. But the fact is that as a movie that's trying to, you know, give you that sort of old school feel, that old school look, I think it delivers that really well. But as I said, I'll get into one of my things that is a little bit of a con about using that style. As well as that, I think all round you get some pretty good performances. Sean William Scott turns up in this. I will say nothing more about him in it. Because otherwise I'm giving too much away. But basically, Sean William Scott is in this. I think Ethan. I always get his name wrong. I think it's Ethan Suplee or Suplee. He's in obviously a lot of stuff. He's been around for many, many years. And it's always nice when he pops up, because I think like when he gets the chance to go those extra steps and depth with characters, he's very good. He almost gives this very sort of almost Rob Zombie-esque character in this movie. But it works, because one of the other pluses for this movie is that it does a very good job of making it sort of feel tone-wise old school horror. When you've got movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas and movies like that, in the 70s, there was horrors where they were very, very dark in tone, very, very sinister. The things that happened in them were not nice things. And also they made you sort of really uncomfortable when you watched them. We don't really get that much in horror anymore. And maybe it's just because of the time and, once again, the way that it was filmed and the way that it was. And obviously when we get movies like Dolly that sort of harkens back to that sort of era aesthetically, then you've got to have the other things that go with it. And that's a plus with Dolly, is that it does use obviously the aesthetics of the past, but also it sort of does a good job at creating the uncomfortableness of the past, and the unsettling approach of what 70s horror was. This movie is a movie that goes to the dark places that make you feel sort of uncomfortable, a little bit uneasy about watching it. And that is where, sort of for me as well, horror really works really well, because that really truly is horror if it makes you feel something. So once again, there are moments in this movie where it goes to the extra levels that like maybe a lot of other movies will not. And that's not necessarily saying about the blood, guts and gore. It's about the things that are happening to the characters in the movie, where they're not shy and don't shy away of going to those depths that other movies won't go to. So I think that that's a really good thing and a plus for the movie. But talking about blood, guts and gore, it's got a lot of it. It is very visceral, very violent. It's got some pretty good set pieces in regards to the violence. As I said, it's happy to go to those places with the violence, but also it's happy to go to those places showing you everything and showing you a lot of blood, showing you a lot of guts and gore. So if you are somebody that loves that sort of stuff, then this is definitely a movie that you will want to watch. Practical effects are very good. It'd be interesting. I won't say what it is, but there's an effect that happens in it that's a very obviously big thing that happens with one of the characters. It'd be really interesting to know sort of how they did that, because it's fucked up, but it looks really cool. And it'd be interesting to sort of like know how they did that as well. But once again, that's a good thing for the movie, because it makes you interested in knowing a little bit more about it. And if a movie is rubbish, well, then you don't want to know any more about it. So the sound design is pretty good as well. I think the score is pretty good. So yeah, aesthetically looks pretty good. Performance is good. Sound is good. And I like the fact that it does give that sort of tone of old school, 70s uncomfortable, unsettling horrors, where it's happy to go to those places that maybe other films and other filmmakers won't go. But let's get into my cons. So for my cons of Dolly, I'll get into sort of what I was mentioning earlier about the fact that, yes, I love the old school, grimy, dirty look of horror in the 70s, and it's always cool if we get a form of replication for that. The problem is sometimes it becomes a bit of a gimmick if, especially if you're setting it in modern day. This movie isn't a movie that's set in the 70s or 80s. This is a movie that's set in modern day. Near the start of it, you have a character, they're on their mobile phone and so on. And that's when you're a little bit worried as where this is going, because you don't know whether this is a gimmick. Because, believe it or not, just by shooting something on 16mm film and having a replication aesthetically of an old school movie that, you know, we all love, that sort of cinematic old school dirty look, that can be a very big selling point for the movie, because it makes it a little bit different and a little bit more possibly creative than a lot of other movies that are just shooting on digital and it looks shit, when we can get visually stunning movies that are shot, you know, on 16mm like this movie, and it does look very good. But does this movie then use it as a gimmick? And then that's the other thing as well, is that this movie luckily doesn't play too much on being in modern day world, and that's what I was really worried about. So that's why it's only a very small con, because a lot of it after the first part of the movie, once these characters, obviously they go to the woods, because obviously we get a very generalized story, which might be a con, might be, you know, something that a lot of people don't worry about, but you get a very generic horror story where the couple are going into the woods, and then bad things happen to them because of Dolly, and then the female character gets taken and then essentially treated like a baby, and then these horrible things happen. You know, we've seen this sort of stuff before. It's not inventive, it's not new. So it becomes, you've got to be careful, because you borderline gimmick, and that's what you don't want to do. You know, this movie aesthetically, as I said, looks really good, but if they started working or started creating more of the movie, showing it more in modern day, then it would be more of a problem, because then you're just using the 16mm format as a gimmick to sort of draw people in, when it's also, you don't need to. Because it serves no purpose for the movie, because it's not set in the 70s, it's set in modern day. But luckily, it's only at the start. I got a little bit annoyed. I'm like, well, they got mobile phones. They're not setting it then, so why are they using this format to film it? Because it becomes a bit of a gimmick. But luckily, they move away from that pretty quickly, so I wasn't too annoyed by it. This movie really doesn't bring anything new, and I think that's the sad part, but also I don't think it is something that he's trying to. You know, this feels like a movie. The problem with movies like this, right, and I always say this, is that if you get to at the end of a movie and you enjoy it, that's a good thing. But sometimes when I watch movies, even if I enjoy it, I sit there and I think to myself, what was the point in that? And that's the problem. What's the point? Because it isn't trying anything really new. Yes, it goes to some dark and sinister places. Yes, it has a new sort of horror villain that, you know, still feels reminiscent of what we've seen before, but also still might feel a little bit fresh to other people. And of course, if it is another movie that spawns a sequel, then Dolly returns, or whoever it is. But is there really a point to it? And when I was watching the movie, there were little things that I was getting frustrated by, where it kept on almost taking things from the movies that really influence it. For example, this movie is clearly influenced by movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but there are moments in the movie where they're literally taking scenes from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, such as Sally Hardesty jumping out the window, or the madness, you know, the laughter that through the madness at the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We get that in this movie, and you can homage movies, but for me, I like homages where they're very subtle. They might be in the background or so on. When you're just flat out stealing moments from another movie of, like, we don't know what to do here, well, let's just do what they do in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where she jumps out a window. Oh, well, what do we do here when she's doing this? Well, just make her laughing like a mad person. It didn't suit what was happening. You know, the jumping out the window, you sort of understand, because it becomes about the desperation of getting out of where you are. But it once again, it's a movie that is trying to be a form of replication of movies of the past. When you start integrating things that happen from those movies to your movie, then it doesn't work, because you're essentially just stealing from it rather than doing your own thing. And like I said, the laughter in the car at the end, once again, you're like, oh, rather than you going, oh, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're like, no, they did that in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You're just doing the same thing, but you don't need to. There's always different ways. Also, the other problem with this movie is, of course, there are moments where it's trying to be creative, and it is being creative, and it's being its own thing. And we get this a lot, where movies are only interesting when they're being creative and trying their own thing. It's when they fall back onto formula or classic horror tropes, is when you start then going, you get a little bit pissed off and you get a little bit angry, because you're like, I've seen all this before, and we know these people are making these awful choices. Because there is a moment in the movie where things are happening, but then she then from that point onwards continuously makes bad mistake after bad mistake after bad mistake. And then that doesn't bring any form of like creativity or anything new to it. You're just falling back on a formula that people know and have seen for so long, and a formula that people complain about so much, because we've seen it all before, where people are constantly in these movies making bad decisions. But also at the same time, this movie isn't a movie that doesn't feel like it really cares about that. It's trying to just be the movie that it is. So it's a difficult one, because part of me goes, well, you're not really trying anything new. You're taking things from movies of the past that are obviously, a lot better than this movie. You're paying homage, but you're sort of paying homage, but you're not. You're almost, as I said, just ripping it off and stealing things from it, which you really shouldn't be doing. And you're not really creatively doing your own thing. But at the same time, it almost feels like it's not trying to do its own thing. It's just trying to give us a slasher film in modern day horror, modern day cinema, that feels like an old school movie for us to just sit there and put it on. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because for me, it's about, every all the time, it's about trying to push this genre into a creative, into something that's more creative, or taking this old school formula and bringing it out for a modern day cinema or modern day audience. And not always does it work, of course, but sometimes it does. And this movie just kept on falling back onto the typical horror tropes, but also, like I said, at the same time, I don't think it really gives a shit enough about the fact that it was never trying to not be that, if that makes sense. So I don't know. It's a tough one. Let's get into my overall thoughts. So overall, I think Dolly is a good movie. I think it is a movie that if you really want, that old school aesthetic, that old school feeling of 70s horror, that old school grindhouse, dirty, grimy feel, the uncomfortable and unsettling feeling of 70s horror, then I think that you will get that with this movie. If that's something that you really want, then I think you will really like Dolly. If you are somebody that doesn't honestly care about that, but wants to see a sort of creative horror movie that feels a little bit fresh, a little bit new, then you probably won't like this. Or you will, but it won't give you exactly sort of what you want, because this isn't treading on new ground. This is looking back at the past and bringing it into the present aesthetically and story-wise and tonally. But also at the same time, it feels like it's sort of like ripping those things off, especially when the scenes that it is quite literally doing what it is, it's ripping off the movies that it's a big homage for, and doing the same scenes, but you don't need to, because you can figure out as a filmmaker your own way of doing it. So yeah, if you're somebody that loves blood, guts and gore, and you like it to go to some dark and sinister places that other movies possibly won't, then once again, there's a reason to watch Dolly. I think if you are just somebody that loves horror and just wants to put on a horror movie because it will have the blood, guts and gore, then yeah, this movie is absolutely fine. If you are somebody that loves the aesthetics of movies as well, and you love that old school look, then you will love this movie. But if you are somebody that gets really pissed off by a constant feeling of replication of the past, if you're somebody that gets really annoyed by awful horror movie tropes and mistakes that the characters continuously make, if you get annoyed by that, then you will get really, really annoyed by this movie. But if you are somebody that also doesn't care about that, and you just want to put on a movie and have a good time watching it, then you'll love Dolly. So I think it's really good. Well, I say really good. I think it's good. I enjoyed watching it. Is it a movie? As I always say, if it's a movie that I sit there and watch, and then I go, yeah, I'd watch that again, then that's a win. There are so many movies now that I watch that might be good, but I'm like, I don't care if I see that again. Of course, there's a lot of awful movies that I don't ever want to see again. But with a movie like Dolly, it's one of those movies where you feel like you've seen it before, you know where it's going. It just is hopefully interesting enough to take you on this journey with these characters, with what happens in the movie, for you to go, okay, I enjoyed that and I would watch that again. I would recommend it to people. Am I recommending that you watch Dolly? Yeah, I am. If you love horror and you love old school horror, and you don't care about the tropes, and you don't care about stupid things happening, then go and watch Dolly. I honestly would. And of course, once again, if you get a chance to see it at the cinema, make sure you do. Horror is always amazing to see at the cinema. So get yourself down to your local cinema, watch Dolly if you can. I'm sure at some point it'll be on streaming and so on like that. Pretty soon, I'm sure, once it has its sort of theatrical run. But yeah, I enjoy Dolly, and I think that you will too, as long as you don't care about it ripping off movies of the past that we love, and also people constantly making the stupidest decisions that they always do in horror. But it's fun, and that, I think, is a very, very good thing. So there we go. That's my review for Dolly. Go and enjoy it. And if you enjoyed this review, please do the usual, the stuff that I hate doing. Please subscribe. Of course, everything I do is absolutely free. It don't cost you anything, and subscribing don't cost you anything as well. So I try and do what I can to give you the very most honest and constructive reviews, passionate reviews, or conversations about horror that is out there. I truly love this genre. And I love doing this. So please subscribe, follow us on the socials, all that sort of stuff, on the live streams, all that sort of stuff. But there we go. That's my review for Dolly. Go and watch it, irrelevant of what I say. But until next time, stay creepy, fuckers.